This week on Myth, it's the epic conclusion to the tale of the Mayan Hero Twins. You'll see that you should always be kind to orphans, that you shouldn't let dancers burn down your house, and that resurrection is tricky. Then, in Gods and Monsters, if you hear whistling from the woods, hide your thumbs. This is the Myths Your Teacher Hated podcast, where I tell the stories of cultures from around the world in all of their original, bloody, uncensored glory. Modern tellings of these stories have become dry and dusty, but I'll be trying to breathe new life into them. This is episode 151F, Dance Macabre. As always, this episode is not safe for work. This is the sixth and final part of the Mayan story of the Hero Twins. When we last left this story, twin brothers Hunhunapu and Vukubhunapu, one hunter and seven hunter, had annoyed the lords of Xibalba, the gods of death, with their constant ball playing. Thus, the two mortal men were summoned by the lords of Xibalba to a fatal game of Pak to Pak, a traditional Mayan ball game. The severed head of the dead Hunhunapu managed to spit on the hand of Lady Blood, herself a lord of the underworld, and get her pregnant. She escaped to the surface and gave birth to twins, taking them to live with their grandmother after completing an impossible task to prove her claim. The infant twins Hunapu and Xbalanque were tormented by their older half-brothers, who tried to murder them as infants and bullied them as they got older. The younger twins got the last laugh by turning their tormentors into monkeys and tricking their grandmother into driving them away from human civilization. They tried their hand at farming, by which I mean they used magical tools to do all the actual hard work of farming for them, but their attempts were foiled by the local wildlife. They trapped a rat who was part of the scheme against them and forced it to talk. The terrified rodent revealed the existence of the hidden Pak to Pak equipment left by Hunhunapu and Vukubhunapu back in episode 151A. Using trickery and the help of their new buddy the rat, Hunapu and Xbalanque recovered the hidden ball gear and began to play. This of course annoyed Hunkame and Vukubkame almost immediately, and the lords of Xibalba sent another summons to a ball game in the underworld. The twins each left an unripe maize ear planted inside the house to let their mother and grandmother know if they lived or died, before beginning their own descent into the underworld like their fathers before them. The twins made it safely to Xibalba and avoided the pitfalls that had doomed their father. Thus, they actually had the chance to play Pak to Pak with Hunkame and Vukubkame. After a little attempted cheating/murder, it turned out that the death gods were actually serious ballers. The Xibalbans won the first game, but Hunapu and Xbalanque managed to squeak out a tie on every subsequent game. Each night, after a long day of playing ball, the twins would retire to a new chamber of horrors to sleep, but managed to outwit the death trap in each one. That is, until the night they slept in the House of Bats. Camazotz, the bat god, decapitated a very surprised Hunapu, leaving Xbalanque alone in the underworld. With the help of some local wildlife and some conveniently shaped gourds, Xbalanque managed to regain his brother's head, which the lords of Xibalba had been using as a Pak to Pak ball, and used it to resurrect Hunapu. With the renewed power of teamwork, the twins were able to win the game, defeating Hunkame and Vukubkame, but pissing off the death gods in the process. With the help of a pair of seers, the humans convinced the Xibalbans to build a giant oven to try and trick the twins into roasting alive in. To everyone's surprise, the mortals were not fooled by this trick, but instead fell willingly to their fiery deaths. The Xibalbans were shocked at how easy it had been to finally kill those meddling kids once and for all, especially after how much trouble they'd been so far. Still, not ones to look a gift horse in the mouth, the Lords of Death celebrated this unexpected but very welcome victory. The score was mortality 0, death, all living things ever. As it should be. Just to be sure though, Hunkame and Vukubkame summoned the seers ascended and descended, who had been the ones to suggest the fiery pit option in the first place. As Hunapu and Xbalanque had predicted, the death gods wanted advice on what to do with the bones of the fallen. Hunapu had come back from what seemed like certain death once already, so they didn't want to leave anything to chance. The conversation went exactly as planned, and ended with the bones of the two brothers being ground up to dust individually, and scattered separately along the course of one of the rivers of the underworld. This should have scattered the dust far and wide, preventing the boys from any chance of resurrection, but, as we saw last episode, this was instead all going according to plan. The dust didn't drift on the water, instead sinking immediately beneath the waves. They lay on the riverbed for 4 days, giving the Xibalbans a sense of confidence. On the 5th day, the water bubbled and frothed, and from it emerged Hunapu and Xbalanque, very much whole and alive once more. Their emergence from the water did not go unnoticed. They were spotted by numerous denizens of the underworld who thought the two boys looked like mermen. Their faces were known to many by now, and so word was carried to Hunkame and Vukubkame, who immediately ordered a search for the impossibly resurrected twins, but they had no luck. No sign could be found of Hunahpu and Spelunky. The next day, the twins reappeared in Xibalba as a pair of poor, bedraggled orphans, dressed all in torn-up rags instead of real clothes. The sight of two unfortunates in the land of the dead would usually be fairly unremarkable, but these two did not act as others in their situation would. No, they danced wildly and with abandon through the underworld, doing the dances of the whippoorwill, the weasel, the armadillo, and the centipede in turn. Much has been lost about what exactly these dances entailed, but we do know that the dance of the centipede involved wearing masks and macaw tail feathers, while swallowing sticks or obsidian daggers like a sideshow sword swallower. The Hero Twins are pretty fucking metal. As they danced, the twins performed miraculous wonders. They set fire to a house with only their movements, only to recreate it whole and unharmed from the ashes a moment later. This feat drew appropriate gasps and applause from the growing audience. As the crowd watched, first one, then the other twin would throw himself down into the flames in certain death, only to rise again, once more alive and unharmed. The supposed orphans died and were resurrected over and over, paving the way for the next part of their clever attack on Hunkame and Vukubkame's power. Word of the incredible skill of these two dancers, and of the wondrous miracles they were performing, soon reached the ears of the two Lords of Death. With their disguises, none recognized them as Hunahpu and Spelunky, leaving the Xibalban lords confused and intrigued. "Who are these two poor orphans that dance so in our court? Are they truly so skilled in the art of dance? Are their movements truly so graceful and beautiful?" The messengers assured their lords that yes, these two strange beggars were every bit as unbelievably skilled and incredibly talented as the story said. Well then, it only stood to reason that the twin rulers of the underworld should get a private showing of the spectacle. Messengers were sent out to invite the two orphans to come and perform for Hunkame and Vukubkame at the Palace of the Dead. These entreaties were carried to the two dancing orphans word for word, but the orphans feigned fear and hesitancy. "Oh, we can't possibly go to somewhere as grand and sophisticated as the palace. We are far too timid to enter into such a lordly house. Our faces are far too ugly to be seen among such beauty. Our eyes are too wide with poverty to be at home among such wealth and power. Please, we are merely humble dancers. It simply wouldn't be appropriate for us to dance at the palace. We are deeply honored, but please tell your lords that we simply cannot." The messengers had been given very clear instructions not to take no for an answer, however. It was really less of an invitation and more of a summons, and one did not refuse a summons by death itself. The orphan twins were threatened with pain and misfortune if they continued to refuse, and so, with visible apprehension, they finally agreed to go. Even then, they often had to be prodded and goaded into actually moving since they kept dragging their feet and trying to veer off course. The messengers kept them moving in the right direction, and eventually, the entire party came to the palace. The two orphan dancers cowered at the awesome power of the two great lords as they entered the court of the dead, throwing themselves on the ground and prostrating themselves. Hunkame and Vukubkame grinned twin skeletal grins of their obvious fear. After all the bullshit that Hunahpu and Spelunky had put them through recently, it was a welcome sight. "Which mountain is the one near your home? Who are your people?" It was and is still common among the Quiche people to give directions in relation to which mountains are along the path to or closest to your destination. For instance, go 2 mountains west and 1 north. The two mortal orphans quailed with fear, their voices shaking as they answered. "We do not know, O great lord. We do not know where we come from, nor do we know the faces of our mother and father. They died when we were very young." Which was enough answer to satisfy etiquette, but utterly unsatisfying. The two death gods were enjoying all of this proper respect, though, so they didn't press the issue. "It's no great matter. On with the show. Come now, dance for us. What do you wish as payment for your performance?" The two mortal men shook even harder with terror, voices trembling. "Truly, we ask nothing of a lord as great as you. We are so very frightened, my lords." "If you dance as well as everyone says, then you have nothing to fear. Dance now, and do not be timid or afraid. First show us that dance in which you sacrifice and resurrect yourselves. Then do the one where you burn down our home. Come, show us everything you know. We are very excited to see your show. We are very gracious lords, as you will see. Since you two are simply a pair of wretched orphans, we will pay whatever price you ask." Which, as we've seen time and time again, is never a good idea. Open-ended promises always come back to bite you in the ass. With no other choice left to them, the orphans rose and began to play their music and dance to the beat. Word of the performance spread through Xibalba like wildfire, and in no time, the palace was overflowing with spectators. Every denizen of Xibalba with any power at all was there to watch. And though it was incredibly crowded, none complained, for the two dancers were every bit as good as rumor said. The two men did all the dances they knew: the weasel, the whippoorwill, the armadillo. Hunkame and Vukubkame were entranced by the performance. "Here, sacrifice my dog and bring it back to life." It's worth noting that dogs acted as psychopomps in Mayan mythology, so they were a common sight in Xibalba. It was believed that dogs would carry the newly deceased down into the underworld, ferrying them safely across the perilous rivers that have given our heroes such trouble in these stories. Thus, it was not at all strange that a death god had a beloved dog, not unlike Cerberus and Hades, in fact. The two young men did as they were bid. The dog was sacrificed and then immediately revived, smiling and wagging his tail furiously, as though this was all some great game. It was an incredible miracle, and all were thrilled to witness it. "Wonderfully done. Now burn my house down." And so they did. Said house was, as I just mentioned, absolutely overflowing with Xibalban lords as the building burned to ash, but none were harmed by the flames. In an instant, the raised structure was whole once more, surrounding the amazed gods and demons. "Incredible. Simply incredible. Now do a person. Sacrifice him so that he doesn't truly die." And so they did. A terrified but thrilled member of the crowd was grabbed up and brought onto the stage. I assume he's a lesser demon or something, but the story isn't really clear, just calling him a person. They laid him down and tore out his heart, laying it before Hunkame and Vukubkame. All could see that this was no trick. The man's heart had truly been removed. Then the heart was put back, and the man was brought back to life, his heart lightened and overjoyed by the experience. "Incredible! Even as gods of the dead, we do not know how you are doing this. And now it's time for an even greater marvel. Sacrifice yourselves. We have heard it is your greatest trick and dearly desire to see it done." And so they did. Hunahpu, because of course it was Hunahpu, was sacrificed by his twin brother Xbalanque. Each of his arms and legs was severed from his body by a wickedly sharp blade. Then his head was cut off and placed well away from his torso. His heart was carved out of his chest and placed on a zalik leaf, the kind used for wrapping tamales, as an offering to the gods of Xibalba. The living twin Xbalanque danced around the blood-soaked corpse of his brother to the delirious delight of all watching. The spectacle and the power was enough to leave those watching truly drunk with the sight of it all. As the excitement reached a peak, Xbalanque called out, "Arise!" and the butchered corpse knit itself back together and arose, once more whole and alive. Hunkame and Vukubkame celebrated this miracle as though they themselves were the ones performing it. They were so wrapped up in the performance that they could almost believe that they themselves were the ones out there dancing. They lost themselves in it, abandoning their hearts to the dance. And then it occurred to them that there was absolutely no reason that they couldn't be part of the performance themselves. They were the lords of Xibalba after all, and had summoned these two incredible dancers here to perform for them. Why shouldn't they get to participate? And so Hunkame and Vukubkame stood up and strode towards the two dancers. "Us next. Sacrifice us the way you did the others." Hunahpu and Xbalanque bowed low before the death gods. "As you wish, O great lords. We will sacrifice you, and surely you will be revived. After all, are you not death itself? We're here to entertain you and your lesser lords and your servants, so we will do as you have commanded." Hunkame, one death, was the first to be sacrificed. As his corpse lay spread out across the floor, Vukubkame, 7 death, was also sacrificed. The death gods were dead, their limbs hacked off, their heads decapitated, and their hearts carved out of their chests. The Xibalbans waited with bated breath for the bodies to knit themselves back together, for death to return to life. But nothing stirred. Slowly, it dawned on the assembled lords and vassals that the kings of the dead were not going to be resurrected. They were well and truly dead at the hands of these two strange orphan dancers. As this was dawning on them, another lord was grabbed from the crowd and sacrificed as the two death gods had been, and, likewise, he was not resurrected. That was enough to put the fear of death into the denizens of the underworld. They fled in a great mob from the slaughter, tripping and trampling each other in their haste to get away. Racing in a blind panic, the crowd found itself stuffed into a ravine near the palace. Those behind shoved those ahead deeper and began to climb on top of them, trying desperately to scramble up the sheer cliffs to safety. Before they could get anywhere near the top, a swarm of innumerable ants poured over the top of the ravine, driving the terrified Xibalbans back. They were routed and defeated. Bowing their heads, the Xibalban lords and servants all surrendered and allowed themselves to be corralled back to the palace, where the butchered corpses of their great lords still lay. Hunkame and Vukabkame, the great gods of death, had been defeated. As the other Xibalbans returned to their conquerors, they saw that the humble orphans had been transformed. Gone was the dirt and rags and their ragged appearance. Instead, the familiar faces of Hunahpu and Spelunky stood there in all their glory as the Hero Twins. "Hear now our names. We shall declare them to you along with the names of our fathers." As a side note, it was traditional in many Mesoamerican societies, including the Maya, to declare one's name once a victory had been won or dominance had been established. This is the twins declaring victory over Xibalba. "We are the ones who slew you, Hunahpu and Spelunky. We have come here as avengers for the unjust deaths of our fathers, Hunahpu and Vukabhunahpu, and for the misfortunes cast on our family. We have endured all the tests and tribulations, the hardships and horrors that your dread realm could conceive of to bring justice to our fathers. And now we shall slay you all as retribution, and none of you shall be spared for your part in their death." The surviving Xibalbans had no doubt that these two impossible mortals could do it. They had all seen the twins sacrifice and resurrect themselves before slaughtering the gods of death. They had seen the swarm of insects that had come to their bidding. They threw themselves before their conquerors, weeping and begging. "Have pity on us, great heroes. Your fathers, Hunahpu and Vukabhunahpu, were indeed sorely mistreated. We have wronged them who are buried at Crushing Bulb Court, and you as well, Hunahpu and Spelunky. Have pity on us." The twins considered with one of those silent twin conversation glances. "Very well. We will spare you, but we have conditions. Hear now our declarations for Xibalba. Never again will the underworld be a rich realm. Your offerings will never again be great. No longer will you receive the hearts of living creatures as sacrifices. Instead, you will make do with the sap of the croton tree. Clean blood will no longer belong to you, only that which is already spilled on the ground and is of no use to the gods above. You will no longer have new pots or griddles, only the broken and worn out ones. You shall eat only the creatures of the grass and the creatures of the wastelands. The children of the light are no longer yours, only things of no importance, the abandoned things, the sinner, the malevolent, the wretch, the molester. Those who have clearly done wrong and harmed those around them shall be the only ones given to you. You are now forbidden to simply seize any who strikes your fancy, only those who place themselves in your power by doing evil. So shall it be." To explain this a little, the Maya often offered up their own blood as sacrifices to the gods, using cactus needles to draw it in small amounts and give a portion of their life force to the divine. This clean blood would be collected in ceremonial pots. Thus, the Xibalbans are now relegated to only blood that has spilled on the ground, and is thus dirty, due to injury, illness, or violence. Likewise, broken pots were often left at shrines at year's end to symbolize the passing of one year into another. Old, broken things represent an ending, while fresh, new pots are a clean beginning. And, as we saw in episode 151b, Lady Blood's prophecy has now come true. The lords of Xibalba must now be sated on the sap of the croton tree that she tricked them with. With this declaration by Hunahpu and Spelunky, the worship of the Xibalbans was brought to devastation. Their glory had never been great, for they had sought only conflict with those living above. They were truly more demon than god, and so they had become. Their names were things to inspire fear, and their ugly faces inspired only disgust. The demons were a source of conflict. They were traitors, and they were tempters into wicked deeds and needless violence. They were liars and tricksters, masters of deception. Any greatness they may once have had was overthrown, and their cruelty was laid bare for all to see. Never again would Xibalba have great power over the world of the living, thanks to the heroics of Hunahpu and Spelunky. Speaking of the world of the living, what exactly was going on up there during this whole lethal ordeal? The twins' grandmother's Mukane was weeping for her grandsons who had been lost to the underworld just as their fathers had been. Her tears and her cries fell upon the ears of unripe maize that the twins planted in the house back in episode 151c. Remember? The ones that would tell their mother and grandmother if the twins found only death in Xibalba? Well, they had sprouted initially, growing strong and healthy. When Hunahpu died, his wilted, but seemed to recover. When the twins cast themselves into the fiery oven last episode, both stalks shriveled up and died. Jmukane had buried palm, or copal incense made from the resin of palo giote trees, an offering before the dead maize stalks as a memorial. Being herself a goddess of fertility and of the seasons, her prayers carried a great deal of weight and may have helped the twins during their struggles in the underworld. When the ground-up bones of the twins had been cast into the river, allowing the young men to resurrect themselves, the maize sprouts had likewise sprung back to vibrant life. Tears of mourning turned to cries of joy at the sign that Hunahpu and Xbalanque somehow yet lived. Shmukani declared these maize stalks to be holy, naming them Center House, Center Ancestral Plot, Revitalized Maize, and Leveled Earth. This was the origin of the planting ritual performed each year. 4 candles would be placed at the corners of the maize field about to be plowed and planted, representing the 4 cardinal directions. In the east, so that light might shine upon the seeds. In the west, so that they might not be burned by the sun. In the north, so that the seeds might be protected. And in the south, so that the harvest may be abundant. At the center of the field was buried a special maize ear known as a yosh, or twins, which would split at the ends to form 2 cobs from 1 stalk. These twin stalks would be harvested each year and blessed by a priest, and kept in a chest hung from the roof. These would be burned and the ashes buried in the maize field to come back to life to make more maize, just as the twins had been burned and come back. The place was known as Center House and Center Harvest because the 2 stalks had been planted at the very center of the home. She named it Level Earth and Revitalized Maize because they had been planted on level, plain soil and because they had died and grown again. Having achieved their victory, there was only one thing left to do. Hunahpu and Xbalanque went out to Crushing Ball Court, and the calabash tree where the decapitated heads of Hun Hunahpu and Vukub Hunahpu had been hung so many years ago. With Hun Kame and Vukub Kame defeated, the twins were finally able to meet their fathers, to see their faces, or at least their withered skulls, and speak with them. Seeing that their father was only a skull, the twins wished for his face to be restored. Names have power, and so Hunahpu and Xbalanque asked the skull, or skulls depending on whether Vukub Hunahpu was also hanging in the calabash tree, to say the names of the different parts of the face. He was able to name his mouth, but not his nose or his eyes, or really anything above the mouth. Being a desiccated skull, his eyes and his nose had long since rotted away, but skulls still have mouths with teeth. Thus, he was able to speak, but little else. Speak to his father. Here at Crushing Ball Court, your sons call upon you. And the skull spoke. The child who is born in the light, and the son who is begotten in the light shall go out first. They shall worship you first, and your name shall not be forgotten. Thus be it. And so it was. Hunahpu, the firstborn, though only by minutes, is one of the 20 named days of the Quiche calendar. It is a day dedicated to the memory of the ancestors, to going to the graves of dead relatives to leave offerings and to honor their memory. That practice started right there in Xibalba with Hunahpu and Xbalanque visiting their dead father. We are glad to have finally seen your face, father. We were merely your avengers, here to win retribution for the loss, suffering, and misfortune done to you by the denizens of this place. Having completed their mission, Hunahpu and Xbalanque arose into the sky as great lights. One became the sun, and the other the moon. We had day and night before, so I'm not sure what was giving us light up until now, but I guess don't think about it. And so ends the tale of the Hero Twins, which means it's time for Gods and Monsters. This is a segment where I get into a little more detail about the personalities and history of one of the gods or monsters from this week's pantheon that was not discussed in the main story. This week's monster is the Tata Duende. Also known as El Dueño del Monte, or the owner of the mountain. This supernatural creature is said to roam the forested mountains of modern Belize. Its name comes from the Yucatec Maya word tata, meaning grandfather, and the Spanish word duende, meaning goblin. Stories of this forest critter extend back to before the arrival of the Spanish in Maya lands, although the name reflects the blend of cultures common in a lot of oral traditions that have survived. The word duende itself was derived from a contraction for the phrase dueño de casa, which means owner of a home, although the term is used more specifically to mean a mischievous spirit haunting a house. As you can probably guess from that little lesson on the origin of its name, Tata Duende is a trickster spirit of the mountains. Stories of this goblin are fairly consistent among people who claim to have seen him. He's about 3 feet tall, often bearded, and wears a floppy, wide-brimmed hat, which is often red and sometimes a sombrero. His clothes are usually made of animal skin stitched together. The strangest bit, and the detail that makes sure you are seeing a spirit and not just a child with an odd sense of style, is that his feet point backwards and his hands have no thumbs. He is generally regarded as a protector of the wild places in the mountains where he makes his home, but that doesn't make him entirely friendly. He guards the trees and the creatures that live there, but isn't always fond of humans. He has a habit of luring children deep into the woods, especially if they're already wandering the jungle trails alone. Tata Duende will then politely request to see your hands. When you show them to him, you need to be very careful to hide your thumbs. If he thinks you are 4-fingered like him, he will let you go on your way. If he sees your thumbs, however, he will bite them off, which, damn, dude. They also reportedly have the power to shapeshift into small animals, or even into the appearance of people you know, making them especially hard to spot. One way to know that they are around is to see horses with their manes inexplicably braided overnight. If you are wandering near its territory, you may also hear his distinctive whistling from the trees. You may also smell the cigar he is said to smoke, or hear the soft strumming of guitar music from the middle of nowhere. In the traditions of the Yucatec Maya, Tata Duende is said to protect children lost in the bush. They frequently ask for permission from the grandfather goblin before entering his woods or hunting in them. So if you are ever in Belize and someone asks to see your hands, hide your thumbs just to be safe. That's it for this episode of Myths Your Teacher Hated. Keep up with new episodes on our Facebook page, on iTunes, on TuneIn, on Verbal, and on Spotify. Or you can follow us on Instagram as Myths Your Teacher Hated Pod, on Tumblr as Myths Your Teacher Hated, on Blue Sky as Myths Podcast, and on Mastodon as Myths Your Teacher Hated. You can also find news and episodes on our website at mythsyourteacherhated.com. If you have any questions, any gods or monsters you want to learn about, or any ideas for future stories that you'd like to hear, feel free to drop me a line. I'm trying to pull as much material from as many different cultures as possible, but there are all sorts of stories I've never heard, so suggestions are appreciated. The theme music is by Tiny Cheese Puff. Next time, we're heading back to the deserts of Arabia for the second of the legendary voyages of Sinbad the Sailor. You'll discover that deserted islands are never a good place to be stranded, that elephants and rhinos are mortal enemies, and that Indiana Jones isn't the only intrepid explorer that has a problem with snakes. Then, in Gods and Monsters, a half-human spirit will hop around on one leg and try to drown you for funsies. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.